Hello, today I'd like to talk with you about the process of identity formation in adolescence. Erickson had a lot to say about the process of identity formation during adolescence, and of course, his identity versus role confusion, or sometimes you'll see it referred to as identity confusion stage, is one for which he is well known. He also commented on how adolescence provides what he called a moratorium time for adolescents to explore different aspects of their identity as they're figuring out more about who they are. Another well-known notion about identity in adolescence comes from James Marcia, M-A-R-C-I-A, who expanded on Erickson's ideas and identified four different identity statuses. Each of these identity statuses varies and is distinguished based on whether or not the adolescent has experienced a crisis and whether or not they've yet made a commitment to some aspect of their identity. We could also say that they perhaps haven't had to experience a full-blown crisis, but at least they've actively explored an area before making a commitment to some aspect of their identity. So we have these two dimensions, commitment on the one hand and crisis exploration on the other, to differentiate these four identity statuses. And these four identity statuses are identity achievement, moratorium, identity foreclosure, and identity diffusion. And we can think about how each of these identity statuses applies to some area of a young person's identity. They may be in a different place, in a different status for one area of their identity than they are in another area of their identity. Making a decision about a major and a profession would be an example of one area. Making a decision about religion would be an example of another area. How we view ourselves with regard to our sexuality, how we experience that part of who we are, will yet be an example of another area. There's so many different aspects to our identity. So let's talk about each one of these identity statuses and how each one is different. In the case of identity achievement, someone has gone through a process of exploration or even crisis and now has made a commitment to some aspect of their identity. Let's say, for example, that an adolescent was raised in a particular faith tradition, and they get to a point in their life where they actively question some things about that faith tradition, and they explore other alternatives. And then eventually they may decide that they really are ready to embrace the faith tradition that they've grown up with, and they feel even more strongly about the good fit with them for that faith tradition now that they've had a chance to ask some hard questions and actively explore it. That would be an example of identity achievement. In the case of moratorium, the individual is in the midst of at least exploration, if not crisis. They're still trying to figure it out. They're not yet to the place of making a commitment. In the case of religious identity, that would be someone who is asking the hard questions. They're searching. They're not there yet, but they're in a process of exploration. And eventually, hopefully, they will be able to get to a place of commitment. And when that happens, then they will have achieved the identity achievement status. In the case of identity foreclosure, the young person pretty much accepts and embraces what they've grown up with and learned about all along. They never really go through a period of active exploration or crisis, and they're okay with what they already have learned about and what they've already just decided from a young age, and they go with that. So in the case of religious identity, they're good with it, with what they've been raised with, what they've learned all along. They don't go through a process of active questioning and exploration, and they embrace what they've been exposed to from a young age, and they're comfortable with that. In the case of career commitment, I always have been a bit envious of those people who knew from a really young age what they wanted to do as far as a career is concerned. They didn't go through a process of crisis or active exploration. They just knew, and they stuck with that decision, and hopefully it worked out well for them. Some of us were quite uncertain and may have changed our majors several times, or went through this process of moratorium and a lot of exploring and even anxiety and worry about it before eventually making a decision. But that's not at all uncommon for that to happen. And then finally, there's identity diffusion. And in the case of identity diffusion, the person has not yet made a commitment to some aspect of their identity, nor are they exploring it or going through a crisis about it. They're just sort of going with the flow, and they're in a state of indecision and perhaps not especially concerned about that when they're in that place of identity diffusion. One of the things I like about Marcia's approach, which of course is based on some of Erickson's ideas, is that we can easily relate to it. You might be able to relate to it at this time in your life. And when you look back on your life, you can probably see how it played out in some area, some aspect of your identity formation. Thank you. I look forward to talking with you again soon.